Hey everybody, this is Isaiah from Magic System Monday, and today I have a question for you. Why is it that despite myself being a dedicated Magic System channel, why is it that I have not made a video regarding the step-by-step process of making a Magic System, or if I have some special method of making them myself? This is something I've noticed that basically all YouTubers, everybody who's into Magic Systems or into anything regarding writing, we're always about these beat sheets and step-by-step processes, and I don't think they're necessarily a bad thing. They certainly have their place, but the truth is, the reason I haven't made one yet is because every time I look at someone else's videos on this very thing, whether it's a dedicated Magic System / world building channel, whether it's something like Brandon Sanderson. I actually don't think I've seen one by Brandon Sanderson. Maybe I just haven't looked hard enough. Or there's other channels like mine, or even somebody like C.R. Rowanson, if you know who that is. So I looked at all these YouTubers' videos on how to make a Magic System and their step-by-step process, and some of them are worth giving a try, or at the very least looking at, because some of them are very, very unique to the experiences, the intuitions, and the preferences of those specific writers. They're not something that should be used for everyone. Having said that, overall, I don't like the idea of trying to come out with a step-by-step list of things to remember to put in your Magic System, or an order of how to come up with one. Aside from the idea of inspiration, which is usually the first step or step 0, quite frankly, there is no real step-by-step process. I noticed that every single time I look at one of these videos and they have an order, I realize you could theoretically do any of those steps first and or last, and even loop back around and repeat. What's the point of having a step-by-step process of steps 1 through 7 when I could be sitting on my couch eating Doritos watching Breaking Bad one day, and then I think of having a chemistry-based Magic System, right? And then ask myself what all that entails. Sometimes you don't know what the mechanics are going to be. Sometimes you think you want to go flavor first. Sometimes there's a specific world building idea that you want to make, and you need to make the mechanics of that Magic System based off of that, right? Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes, if you're like me, you're a discovery writer, and you say, hey, I have mechanics, I have an idea of how things would work. The question is, what are the results of that? So all of a sudden, we're working backwards now. Do you have inspiration? Is there this idea you want to build towards or to justify? Or do you have mechanics and you want to know what the results of those mechanics would be? Those two ideas are literally exact opposites. And while you could always loop back around and change something if you don't like it, there's no point in me making a step-by-step process if you could just pick a random step and go with that. Depending on your personality, or your preferences, or your inspirations, you could start at any of those steps. So what's the point of me making? At the end of the day, as long as you do your best, you cross your T's, you dot your I's, you make sure there are decent limitations that facilitate the type of conflict you're looking for in the story, as long as the flavor is the way you want it, as long as it matches your world, matches the tone of your series, everything's fine. It doesn't really matter what step you do first, or whether you come up with the mechanics first, or the world building first, or if you specifically decide the limitations first. Currently, I'm actually building a tabletop RPG game system, and I've come to learn that any individual step you could possibly think of, you're doing them all at the same time anyway. Sometimes you have this idea in your head of what the fantasy should look like, and you're building the Magic System to be based off of that, and then you get another idea that you think might go very well with these mechanics, or maybe your idea of the fantasy of that world changes. It evolves over time. Now see, I'm a discovery writer, and the series that I'm writing now, probably my most favorite thing I've ever written in the history of ever. That doesn't necessarily mean it's good, but it's the best I've ever made so far. I didn't even have any single idea of what that world should look like while I was starting the writing process. In fact, when I was writing the story, I didn't even have a set timeline of all the events. I read a lot of the events kind of just independently of a timeline, and I did them all as experiments to figure out what I wanted the world to be like and what I wanted the characters to be like. And once I figured all that out, I could either rearrange the events as I saw fit, or just erase them all and use them as a reference for what people are like. In the same way that you might choose to look at different timelines and say Marvel or DC as inspiration for other comic books or other movies that they might put out. And sometimes the world changes with those. Sometimes the characters change, sometimes the magic changes. Sometimes I have an idea, and I realize I don't like the idea anymore. Now, that might all sound like a tangent, but I say that to say this. No matter how much people want to believe that they've dotted their T's and crossed their I's, you're gonna go back and you're gonna go to those different steps and various patterns to rework things anyway. In truth, people just want the illusion of pattern and structure. That way they can convince themselves that they're doing well. There was actually an occasion a couple years back, right when I first started Magic System Monday, where I was watching TV and I noticed there are a lot of magic systems where the powers that characters have, specifically in like anime and certain books and things, are directly meant to reflect the character. Sometimes the power you get isn't about the character itself, but it's about giving them a condition to play off of, a circumstance to play off of. That's kind of what stories are made of. But other times, the power is directly tied to the character's personality, whether that's a world-building feature or not. Take someone like Natsu Dragneel from Fairy Tail. His power, if I'm not mistaken, at least in the early parts of the series, is more or less a direct reflection of his identity as a whole. Not just because he's a dragon slayer and he has dragon magic, but dragon fire is his ability. It's destructive in nature, it's aggressive, it's prominent, he's hot-headed. All those things, the qualities of the power, directly reflect him. Similar things with Naruto, as in the main character from Naruto. He is very brash and unrefined as a person, so most of his powers, even when he's very skilled, often end up being brash and unrefined. Look at the way he uses his Rasengan. He technically hasn't even mastered the ability, he's basically cheating, which is very clever in all honesty, but that's besides the point. So I asked myself, hey, that's very interesting, but I feel like sometimes it's either unnecessary in a narrative sense, or would be interesting the opposite way around. I mentioned this in another episode I did a few months back, where I was reviewing my first episode on Magic System Monday. And what I mentioned, at least somewhere near the end of that video, was consider doing the opposite. And that's one of the main rules that I use when I'm writing. Anytime I have an idea or I feel like a thing needs to be done, I always consider to myself, what would happen if the exact opposite thing were the case? What if instead of going left, you went right? What if instead of going forward, you went back? And that gave me an idea. I used that idea here, and it was a very big inspiration to me. I said, what if instead of having powers that conveniently match the identity of a character, what if we have powers that specifically don't? And what if that became the conflict of the story, or one of the major driving conflicts and even limitations of the Magic System itself? And so there I was, getting to work. It wasn't a Magic System I made out of necessity, although sometimes many writers do make some of their Magic Systems out of necessity. Notice how a lot of books, different book series and movies and TV shows have more than one type of Magic System? That's just an interesting thing. Sometimes there's a main casting system, and then there's some secondary ambiguous thing, or maybe there's enchanting, or maybe they have quote-unquote runes, whatever that is. And those are often made out of necessity. Not always, but not so much this time. So ultimately what I'm saying is, it varies too much. The goals vary too much, the intentions vary too much, the perspective varies too much, and even if you had a set order, you would always end up going back on it eventually. So ultimately, the only thing that making a step-by-step process for creating Magic Systems would do is give you a false sense of professionalism when you go about doing the work that you are going to do anyway. In any case, that's all I have for today. This is Isaiah from Magic System Monday, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.